All right, everybody out there in YouTube land, it is I, Matt Yancik. I am the founder and head game master here at this multinational conglomerate known as Manufactured Myth and Legerdemain. And welcome to tonight's episode of Roleplayer with 1,000 Faces. It has been, as the kids say, it's been a minute. And as my viewers, some of you may know, I am actually a teacher. I went back to teaching here in Cambridge, and I starting the teaching year off is not unlike being hit by a truck. And so the channel kind of dipped a little bit there for a few weeks, but I have got some cool things lined up for the future. And before we get to our fabulous guest for tonight, I wanted to tease a few things that I have coming up here soon on the channel. At any rate, the coming up not not too far from now, not too long from now, on October 4th, Tuesday, October 4th, I have Rick Perry. And he may not be a household name, Rick Perry, but Rick Perry is actually, he's a production designer and he's a creative producer behind Dimension 20. And Dimension 20, I don't know if you've heard of it. You might have. It's this little tiny channel. They do their thing, and I hear they play games, and I kind of wanted to give them a little boost, to help them out a little bit. I've got a few subscribers here myself. I wanted to help him out. But he's going to be on to talk about his production design, the minis and models that he makes. He's going to be talking about the set design and things like that. I think this is really cool because it's going to be a look behind the scenes. Like we often see, the stuff that goes on and the stuff that we see from the front, but we're going to actually step behind the curtain and talk to him a little bit about what he does, his art, his craft, and the science of production design. Following that, I'm also pretty excited to announce that I have Jonathan Hicks. He is the creator of Those Dark Places, who's going to be on Saturday, October 8th. This is an unusual day for Roleplayer with 1,000 Faces. Usually we're on the weekdays, but you may not know this, but Jonathan is across the pond. So he's going to be, because of the time difference, there's about 5 hours difference between the two, where I'm at here, and my Cambridge and his Cambridge. He's not really in Cambridge, but I just like to say that because it sounds like a parallel kind of thing. There's about 5 hours difference, so he's going to be coming on, I think, around 4 or 5 p.m., but please keep your eyes tuned to the channel for the official time announcement. And to be honest, I know that he designed those dark places, but the truth is, this is just an excuse for me to talk about aliens, and even like some smaller films called like Outland and Dragon Slayer. So I'm really excited to have him coming on the program. Last but not least, I know that my mother always gets angry when these things go long. And Mom, I'm sorry, I'm trying to move it along very quickly. I promise you I'll get to our guest very, very soon. I also wanted to say that I've got some more episodes of GMs in the Machine coming up. We did 3 of them before, and then it kind of faltered a little bit, again, because of the early September truck hitting me of teaching. But I'm happy to announce I have a couple cool GMs that will be coming on to talk about their craft, what they do, and we'll be designing some adventures and one-shots together. Um, and so, finally, last thing I just wanted to say is the channel has been growing recently, and I very much appreciate every single little subscription that everybody out there gets me. It's been really great. I've had a lot of cool people on the program, and they've been bringing a lot of cool stuff to the channel, and thanks to them, I really feel like we're kind of doing something special here. And I really like the fact that we get to hear perspectives from all kinds of walks of life and all kinds of backgrounds, and we're looking at stuff that maybe doesn't always get looked at every single day. So I appreciate that. If you're interested in following us, please do think about liking and subscribing, but you could also think about checking us out on Discord, Facebook, or Twitter. All of the information on getting to those various destinations you will find in the description below, or as Matt Colville says, in the doobly-doo. And I don't know if he invented that or if that came from someone else. I'm not really sure, but maybe someday he'll come on and he'll tell us. And so, without further ado, I wanted to introduce our guest for tonight. I'm really excited. I think this is the first time I've had a doctor on the program. How many times have you heard on this program, is there a doctor in the house? And there hasn't been. But finally tonight, if something happens, if someone collapses, if someone needs some English tutoring, if somebody needs to know what happened in 18th century, we've got someone here that can answer those questions. Tonight I am with Dr. Emily Friedman, and she is both a scholar and a critic who enjoys examining media experiences of the past, the present, and the future. So she studied everything from the language of smell to the work of recovered women writers. She studied fan work, live streamed tabletop role playing games, and never published manuscript fiction. So Dr. Friedman has a PhD in English and a master's from the Center of 18th Century Studies at the University of York in England. She is currently an associate professor of English at Auburn University and the director of 18thconnect.org. And don't worry, I'm not intimidated at all. I don't feel nervous about it. As an English teacher, I'm not nervous. I got this. I got this totally. So without any more of my silly rigmarole, let's hop to Dr. Friedman. Dr. Friedman, I want to say thank you very much for coming on tonight. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. We're also in the middle of we're the mid semester, so we're a lot of student
Mm-hmm.
conferences, and as of today, a lot of screeners in my inbox this week. So it's a lot of different hats I'm wearing, and it's an exciting week.
You
So
said
you're catching me before the wave of stuff.
you're mid-semester. When did you
We
go
are. We
back, or when did
are.
you
We
start?
start we start in mid-August, and we will finish before December really gets going.
Oh,
So, yes, thoughts and prayers, please.
I know, right?
So my students are currently I teach a graduate class and an undergraduate research class. And all of them are having individual meetings with me before our fall break starts next Thursday. So, yeah, we got a little bit of it's a good time. It's a good time to have class just be we're gonna play a game for the next 3 class sessions, y'all,
Oh,
while
and you
I
can
sit in the corner and grade.
you can actually call that work too. That's the funny thing. It's like when I was in so I did a few years at film school, and I remember I could actually claim my tickets on my tax returns when I went to watch a movie because they were for education. But I'm a little bit jealous. Like you went back in August and now you got a break coming up. That's actually really I it's been so long since I've been like at that level. I'm actually
Sure.
I'm teaching at the elementary and middle school
You're
level.
doing the hard work, and sometimes the
Different
more
work.
fun work. I had a pre-interview tonight with my personal pack of pixies, my nibblings, ages not quite 8, 4, and not doesn't talk yet, just throws pasta on the ground. And those are great ages. I mean, that the kind of curiosity that hasn't been kind of completely crushed by standardized testing by the time they get to me is a beautiful space.
Yeah. How is that? Like I was gonna say, like sometimes when I talk, so I've taught from college to elementary school level, and I have various opinions about each level. But one of the things you kind of mentioned there is the fact that, for me anyway, I typically do not take my work home. And when I say my work, I just mean my emotional levels, because
Sure.
when I go into the school, I'm like, life is terrible. What did I read 7 bad things on Twitter and 19 on the news, and then I go in and I see the little kids running around elementary and middle, and for the most part like they have hearts of gold mostly because they haven't been kind of like twisted and like changed by life yet. And so when I come home I'm happy. But for you, you are teaching young adults. You're teaching
Yes.
young adults. I mean, you find it to be just as bright and shiny and
Well, you're asking me in the year of our Lord 2022.
yeah.
So as of
Yes.
late, it's been rough,
Important
right? I mean,
context.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I do is fun, and I'm very lucky to have the job I do. I was hired, for those of you who do not know academia, I was hired in 2008, the year that the economy crashed for all of us, but in academia, it meant that I applied for all of the jobs I was eligible for,
Mm,
and over half of those did not hire someone that year. So, and the market has never recovered. So to have a
yeah.
job like mine is I feel very fortunate. But also, we are dealing with students who, the students I'm teaching right now have been in some version of remote or hybrid
Mm,
education for their entire college careers, and
yes.
in their high school careers. And so they're very excited to be back in person, but back in person is still not exactly the same.
Right.
And so it's a little bit disorienting. There is a lot of loss. Um, the My graduate students are happier than the last time I taught a graduate class in the fall of 2020, when we were all remote, and that was really hard. But we're still there's no back to normal in any for any of us. It's
Yeah.
only figuring out what the new thing is. And we're still figuring out what the new thing is. So it's super fun. It is super, I think we're all really tired. I think everybody's really tired.
Yeah.
And so it's not unique to my position, but I would say, yeah, it's tiring.
No, it's interesting that you say that. And ladies and gentlemen, I just want to announce that we're off the rails already. You get two teachers in
I
a
reject your rails
it's
and
it's well, but that's the thing, there are no rails. It's verisimilitude here. You
it
think
is
we're off
open
the rails.
world.
So I wanted like the interesting thing, you mentioned the learning loss and the online learning and all of that because I moved actually I was in Alaska before and I came here to Boston just like 15 minutes and that's very little exaggeration before the pandemic started. And it was within a few months of settling in at a new school, I was teaching online. And so the predominantly I in Boston have I think if I looked at it, I've probably been teaching I was teaching longer online than I was in person. And we've just recently gotten back here, relatively recently. I want to say like a year or a year and a few months ago. How was it? Like, because my kids, I was sincerely worried when I came back because I started at my school and I only knew them through Zoom. And then I got into
Sure.
the classroom and I don't know what your classroom was like, but mine was like fishbowls. So I was teaching high school at the time.
Right.
And everybody was in a fishbowl and the kids were literally I don't know if they could figure out what it was if they knew what it was like to be in person or not, but I would say you guys can laugh. You guys can get up and move around, but they were just focused on like heads down as if they were stuck at their laptops. How was it
Mm.
coming back to teaching after to
Well, it's
classroom teaching?
interesting. Yeah, so it's interesting. My institution went remote halfway through this spring, obviously, like a lot of places did. We went to spring break, and the pandemic happened,
Mm,
and we didn't come back in 2020. The fall 2020, a lot of classes were remote, not all. Certainly my class remained remote. And it was a graduate class. And so that was a hard semester because you're dealing with folks who some of them didn't move away from home, so they
mm,
don't have a cohort. They have the support of their family, but they're not, with their new cohort figuring out how to do grad school.
yeah.
And that's one kind of hard. And the other kind of hard is moving to a new place and then being in your apartment most of the time
Yes.
and not knowing how to build community in that space, and you don't have the support network. So it was hard for everybody, and I was very far away from home for my master's experience, in the face of personal loss. But the kind of loss that a pandemic brings is just so much different. And so we powered through, but it was rough. And then we kind of all came back more or less in the spring, except for the large classes. And
Hmm.
so in the springs, I teach what we call a large format class, what you might call a lecture class. And so it was half and half. I was a talking head on Zoom on Mondays and
Oh,
Wednesdays.
yeah.
to 100 students. And then that 100 student class broke out into sections of 12 to 15 run by graduate TAs. So and vaccines are coming in. And so my job was to observe those in-class moments. So
Hmm.
when I teach in the lecture class, it's always a little bit distanced because I am not holding hands, right? Like I'm not the coach.
Yeah.
I'm the coach to the apprentice teachers who are doing the kind of reinforcing work on Fridays, right? So it's a different kind of way of operating even before. But in pandemic mode, it was, you know, even I think more of a remove. Like
Mm.
I had started setting up Calendly to set up
Yeah.
appointments to meet with students and things like that. But it was much more, it was a stronger bond with the GTAs, which I can't fault them for, but it was a very different kind of experience. And then we were all very confident in
Mm.
the fall of 21. That was when I taught the game class for the first time. And so that was really energizing. We were all still masked, but it was exciting. We were back in person.
Yeah.
And then last spring, um we were masked but back in 100-person class
Yeah.
and in person, and so but still needing to have the hybridity
Yeah.
that comes from, when you don't want students to come to class sick, you're going to need to record those lectures, which means that, any student who wasn't coming in person was getting the splendid view of, you
Right.
know, of my smizing. And so I think that was a really, really hard semester. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out next spring. Don't
Yeah.
know. But so that's the rhythm. Is I teach these what we call upper division and graduate classes in the fall, and that's when the game stuff happens these days. And in the spring, I there are games in my British literature survey, but it is very clearly a core literature class taught for people outside of my College of Liberal Arts, because they have their own classes. The English majors take other classes, the honor students take other classes. So I'm justifying the existence of the humanities and British lit in particular to our very smart engineers and our
Right.
scientists and folks like that. So which is a fascinating challenge.
Yeah.
It's a fun challenge.
It's funny, like, but now you mentioned though, you've kind of come out. Do you feel like you've sort of come out the other side at this point, or do you
No,
think it's
absolutely
still?
not.
Oh, not at all. Okay.
No, it's worse. It's worse. It's worse, to be quite candid. Our numbers are not great, to the extent that we know numbers, and we do not have university masking policies. So we have vulnerable
Yeah.
faculty and students who don't have the protections they had when people were concerned for themselves.
Right.
And that's very hard. It's very hard to, speaking of pedagogy, like to kind of have what a feminist ethic of care, a pedagogical ethic of care, when the fundamentals of the care that we show one another in practices like masking and things and taking other kinds of precautions have vanished. And
Mm.
that's extremely difficult.
Yeah. It's right now. It's a little bit. It's weird because when I'm and now I'm speaking outside of my school.
Sure,
But
sure.
I
Neither of us are speaking for our institutions at this
right.
moment in time.
And mine is never named. I should have yeah. I I never name mine, though I've been kind of sometimes specific about we can I drop some hints. Um
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like it's discoverable,
yes, you could
probably.
really yeah, I'm sure that like a security person online could like say like, "Oh my goodness, Matt, what are you
Sure.
doing?" But at any rate, like I feel like I wear of course I'm masked at school, but what I'm really trying to do is our school currently has a it's up to the individual students, and I try my
Mm.
best to sort of set an example for my students, but I don't really have a lot of say and leeway necessarily in that respect.
We
But
are
oh,
we are officially allowed to require it if it's in our syllabus, but it's one of those things where, you have to decide, is this where you're going to expend your kind of clout?
yeah,
And so instead, I haul a suitcase with air purifiers,
Right.
which has seems to have saved us a couple of times already. We've had some known folks who have come down with COVID, but we haven't had, I don't think, signs of community spread within our classrooms.
Yeah,
So,
we have been relatively good. My school has been with the changing of the mask policy this year. Um, notwithstand outside of the picture at this point. Otherwise, they've been pretty excellent. I mean, we were tracked everywhere we went. We had tons of like the quick tests available to us at any
mm.
moment. They would just shove them at us and just say, "Take them, take them." In fact, I think we're ready for another pandemic. If you like open up the closet, you can see all of the stuff, all the masks, all the gloves, all the like everything you would need. We had some sort of an app. I can't even remember what it was.
Oh
Um,
yeah, no, the kind of tracing and app
Yes, to help
checking kind of
us.
stuff.
Yeah, and the thing was, mine was yeah, I didn't even quite understand what I was doing because my app was in French, and I
Oh my
do.
God.
Yeah, well, if you knew my school, you'd understand. I teach at a bilingual French school, which is
Gotcha.
exactly what I mean by
Sure.
dropping hints about where I
Sure,
where I work
sure.
and all that. But they were pretty excellent as far as that goes. And this year, I have to admit, we haven't had any. Everyone's been fine, knock on wood or fake wood on my
Right.
desk. But everything's been fine. Um, I'm so sorry. Let's.
No, no, no. And I'll give you a segue.
Yeah, yeah. Sure.
Which
Oh,
is to
thank you.
say, it's so fascinating because one of the things that we're able to do, but no matter whether we're hybrid or whether we're on Zoom, is because now all of us are kind of wired for sound in these kinds of ways,
Yes.
we can have these visitors from, for example, the world of actual play. And what's really striking is talking to people and realizing that for people who are performing in
Mm,
studios, the precautions are still there and are more heightened than anything I've ever experienced in the pandemic, right? Like, you don't work if you're sick and you're being tested constantly. Everyone who's not on camera at any given time is masked. COVID protocols in a place where people are not replaceable
yeah.
are far more stringent,
Yeah.
right? Which has been really an interesting kind of uh thing concept to discuss with people who are kind of in that particular space of actual play and those kinds of you know studios that are have COVID officers
Right.
and whatnot.
Right. It is. Yes. And you're right. And all of this kind of also gets me into the idea and maybe the area of wondering how all of this has really affected and changed the way that people game, the way that
Mm,
people learn, the way that people
mhm,
communicate.
mhm.
And it's interesting to me because you are someone that I would never in a million years, were it not for Zoom, and like the miracles of the internet and all of that, and all of my other guests and the people that are watching, and I see everybody in the chat. I'm so sorry I don't always have a chance to reply, but it's amazing the way that everyone can connect now. And so there was a very, even though we had a few scares, say last year with the school, we were able to just simply switch. Everybody goes home, we close up shop at the school, and then we continue to teach online for like a
Right.
week or a few days or whatever it happens to be. I can't remember what the requirements were until we were able to go back, and then the proper person was like isolated, and then they were
Mm.
tested and all of that stuff. Um, let me ask you this, because we are a gaming show a little bit. We'll
Yeah.
talk about games. What got you into role playing games, or what got you into
um
games, or what was first, games, role
yeah,
playing, or
so no so uh role playing games I've been playing for now over half my life. I am part of the, like, what we might call the white wolf generation.
oh,
I mean, I was born in 1981. So I the 90s, let's be honest, at least where I was growing up in Houston, Texas, no one gave a fuck about Dungeons and Dragons. I love Dungeons and Dragons, but that was not the thing. The thing was the World of Darkness games. So I have my early edition Vampire and my
mm,
copy of Changeling, and then from there, Steve Jackson Games, which is based in
you
Texas.
mentioned that, yes.
You know, I went to a Catholic high school, so it seemed so appropriate to
Yeah.
play in nomine and be a bunch of angels and devils and humans with ties to the sacred. It was the way that we convinced one of our friends who is an extremely devout Catholic. We called used to call her Pope Haley. We convinced her this was a game that we could play. I won't say I was a good storyteller or GM, but I tried, as many of us, I think, did in those days. Um, Very LARP adjacent.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, it's, the golden age of computer role playing games and
Yes.
computer adventure stories. The fact that, um, it is a crime that I have not yet gotten to return to Monkey Island just yet. I'm now saying that I'm saving it for when I play it with my nephew next week.
Mm.
Because my first memories of even playing those kinds of games were collaborative, right? We didn't have Twitch. We had watching your older brother use the
Yes.
controls and yell at them about, going to CompuServe to get the cheat codes and the walkthroughs that we can now get for free on the internet. And
What?
so Dungeons and Dragons didn't come into my life until 5th edition, and right at the start of 5th edition, I was
Oh.
work yeah.
Okay. No, no.
Um,
Keep going.
yeah, so I had kind of taken a step back in college from the world of nerding because of my particular undergraduate institution, which is a women's college outside of Philadelphia, um, has a subset of sci-fi fantasy nerds who are also, in retrospect, could have been flirting with a little bit of white supremacy. Probably not, that's slanderous, but they were setting themselves as a separate entity from the
Yeah.
rest of us. And
Yeah.
so I was like, I've got other things to nerd about at this moment in my life. And so it wasn't until I got this job, I'm here in Alabama, and I overhear my friends in the history department at a party talking about their D&D game, and I'm like, "Oh, I've been watching some early actual play like Acquisitions Incorporated, which had been doing D&D Next and that sort of thing before that. Can I play?" And
Mm.
they look at me and they're like, "We didn't think you'd be interested." And like, I am, and I'm like the person who takes the notes, and I'll be your cleric, and all
That's
that sort
awesome.
of good stuff. So yeah, so that's kind of like the path that brought me as a player along.
Can we rewind? Because when you mentioned Secret of Monkey Island, can I ask a
Yes.
few nerdy things? So
Yes, please.
I am someone who may or may not, and I don't know if you're going to know these platforms or not, because I was pretty nerdy. I started playing things like Labyrinth, based on the Jim
Yes.
Henson game. I played that on the Commodore 64, and from
Nice.
the Commodore 64, I moved on to the computers I have stacked right here and on display.
Nice.
My Amiga 500, my Amiga
Oh, my
1000,
brother had an
my
Amiga.
Amiga 2500, and if for those of you watching at home, you probably don't recognize this terminal sitting on top of my refrigerator the way that Steve Jobs intended it to be. This is the Next computer, which is Steve's computer after he was kicked out slash left Apple. He designed it. So I was playing a lot of
That's
like goofy
bonkers.
games. This was an education computer that I always wanted. It was like a $15,000 or $20,000 machine. I bought it for much less than that about a year or so ago. Finally, after I've always wanted one. What were you
Awesome.
playing those games like Monkey Island and what else were you playing? Like what computer games were you playing, if I can
So
ask?
no, wait, and so basically, if it's Lucas Arts,
Yes.
I played it, and if it's Sierra, I played it. My most visceral memories are of the Monkey Island series,
Mm-hmm.
and my siblings and I playing all of the King's Quests together. Um, I also have a soft spot, and in fact, recently, like within the last year, replayed Loom. So
Mm-hmm.
you can indeed ask me about Loom. Um, I because I could not master it as a child.
Yeah.
And I never got my head around it, but I loved the physical, that was when games had paper,
Yeah.
right? And you were writing down the
Yes.
spells and the notes. For those who don't know about Loom, who might be here, you cast spells by remembering sequences of musical notes. And so for those who do not have kind of photographic or eidetic memories, you had a booklet where
Yeah.
all of the spells that you could possibly learn were listed, and you could fill in the relevant notes and the sequence kind of in a little space in
Mm.
the book.
Yeah,
Um,
I love those games, and there's something about, I don't know if you feel the same way, but and maybe it's just in going through a certain age or whatnot, but I feel like those games captured me in ways that games, even though I have a PS4 and I play games and I play that stuff, and I play games on my gear here. But those games kind of captured me in a way that other games haven't, and they sort of stuck with me. Like I can still see that LucasArts interface where they have a picture at the top, right? And you
yes.
can see your little figure. You can move your person around. And at the bottom, I think it was called Scum or something. The
Yes.
interactive system where you matched up the words to form like a command for your
Yes.
character. And I
Right.
love that. Like, I think the first time I saw that used, I think, was on the Commodore 64 with Labyrinth, their version of the Jim Henson movie.
Yeah.
Um, I think though, so you hadn't really been playing RPGs at that point, but it sounds like you're kind of into the narrative aspects of gaming and the storytelling and all of that. Was
For real.
was there
Yeah.
something that, like, I know you mentioned the LucasArts games and things like that, but something carry you between then and to World of Darkness, or was there?
Well, I mean, those are really close in time if you
Hmm.
think about it. I mean, especially
Yeah.
since, so much media has a half-life, right? Especially in a time of it's like I think about it the way I think about television reruns, right? Like I have visceral memories of television shows that did not air live
Mm.
when I have been alive, but or when I was conscious, right? I'm a Star Trek The Next Generation person. Like that's my first Star Trek, but I was not. That's the rerun
Yeah.
system, right?
Yeah.
That's the fact that, Paramount had this entire apparatus to continue showing it long after it stopped airing. So I may have seen the back half of it live, but I'm pretty sure I didn't see like, Encounter at Farpoint
Right.
live.
You are a nerd and you've impressed me.
Thank you.
That's great.
I used to have the geek code, and it had a lot of stars.
Well, what
Um
I think it's great that you know the system that Paramount had in place, because what they had in place was if you wanted to air the new episodes, you had to air the old episodes like at 11 or something like that, right? So in order to get
yeah.
or maybe it was vice versa. Like it was some package deal where you had both of them
Yeah, but
came
it was
together.
a package deal of the kind of way that they kind of existed, especially before like, you know, UPN and stuff
Yes.
came in not long after that. But yeah, so it's one of those things where those the golden age of adventure games kind of had its peak much earlier than say the mid 90s World of Darkness, but the games, those sequels to Monkey Island, I
Yeah.
mean, there were Monkey Island sequels, when I was in college. By that point it was already becoming a nostalgia engine, but the 90s, you were not trying to make a backwards compliant
Mm.
computer in order to or an emulator in order to play those games or anything along those lines. So for me, those are overlapping kinds of experiences. Maybe a year or so of transition between those, um,
What
in,
was
in
it
that kind of way.
what was it about, now to sort of move forward a little bit more, what was it about the World of Darkness games then that caught your attention? And what's interesting is you're right. Like at that time, it feels like D&D was kind of on the decline, and World of Darkness came in. So could you tell me a little bit about what it was that attracted you to the World of Darkness
Sure.
games, and if you will, maybe a little bit about why you think D&D might have been on the decline and why World of Darkness was kind of coming onto
Well,
the
it's so
scene?
funny, right? Because like the decline of D&D is the satanic panic, and yet then the World of Darkness thrives. That doesn't make any sense. But for me, my first memory of Dungeons and Dragons, which is not me playing, is me being barred from playing, not by an adult, but by my older male cousins who were playing it and it was the game that they were playing, and they were older than me, and I don't know if it was gendered because they were just all a bunch of boys that were
Mm.
more years older than I was. So they were that was a thing that they did,
Yeah.
right? And so I mean, I think the way I got into the world of darkness was the way that I think a lot of people get into RPGs, which is you have a friend or you have friends who find it and are into it. And so I had a group of friends who were mostly they are now living artists,
Mm-hmm.
and creatives in different kinds of ways. And I don't know which one of them like heard about it first, but of course, by that point, you're also talking about, if I can talk about like we were on CompuServe to get the cheat codes and the walkthroughs for games, a few years earlier, you're now talking about the mid to late 90s. We have the internet. It's not a big internet,
Mm.
but that also paradoxically means that it's more likely that if you're a nerd in one area, you're gonna find
Mm.
the nerds in these kind of overlapping areas. So, um, you know, you're an X-Files nerd and a Babylon 5 nerd, and your friend is a big anime dork. You don't have much anime to look at because on at 5 a.m. and it's
Right.
Sailor Moon in the bad
Right.
dub, but you've got those kinds of circles. And I was in a big city that did have an anime
Mm.
store for whatever that was worth at the time. But so one of my friends in high school was into the world of darkness and thought it'd be cool, and we got the books, and because that was not super hard,
Mm.
and we kind of fell into it. Somewhere probably in the bowels of the Internet Archive, or like the you know world building Innomine stuff that I did that probably included stills from Dawson's Creek. I mean, these are the kinds of weird
Yeah.
media pastiches and overlays that are happening in that kind of right before the turn of the millennium in those kinds
Yes.
of ways.
What was it in particular? Was there a particular slice of World of Darkness? Because they had like a whole bunch. I mean, they still do.
Yeah, they'd still do.
It's an assortment. It's a spectrum of
Yeah.
all kinds of different games. Was there one in particular that you enjoyed, or one that caught
So
your
so the
attention?
Yeah, so the one that we played was Vampire, which was always the one that I won't say it was the one I was most attached to, but it was the one I used to. But I've talked to Jason Carl about this, kind of teasingly. All of the clan imagery and the clans that are represented in the actual plays and things like that. There's no space for the Salubri, because the Salubri are the like ones who are going to get killed very quickly. And so I have this soft spot, so which is why I was like fascinated by Innomine. Is like I'm fascinated by characters who are too pure for the world. For a while I flirted with Changeling in terms of the world of darkness, because I think it's instead of being about monsters, it's about creatures who are maybe not too good for the world, but who are not of this world,
Mm.
and who can dimly remember and not remember, right?
Mm.
Like that the dreaming is this kind of um you know source of power and lure and space of possibility, but one that you are disconnected from in interesting kinds of ways.
It's interesting.
um
I think my favorite, to be honest, I wasn't in on the World of Darkness when
sure,
it came out, because what's funny is I think my particular like wave,
your ebb
like
and
my
flow, you
wave
caught the
sign was,
previous
yeah.
wave.
Yes, it was something like that. It was a little misaligned, and I think at that point I was like, role playing games are for kids. I'm in college. I live in New York City now. I'm going to be like a big I'm going to do this and that and
Sure.
the other thing. And I really missed out because I had friends that were into it in that first wave. I do remember being slightly like thinking in my head, that's actually kind of cool. Like these guys actually dress up and then they go to like a big, like someone would rent out like a floor in a building in New York City or in a warehouse in like the
Right.
Bronx or Brooklyn or somewhere, and then you'd go and it was a live action role play within the system. And like they would come back from these things with these amazing stories that I would pretend not to be sort of like, well, that sounds interesting, but I'm gonna work on my
Sure.
studies here. I'm trying to graduate. I'm a New Yorker now. And now I look back on it and I'm like, oh my goodness. But Changeling was one of the ones that attracted me, and I always maybe my interpretation is probably a little bit different than what they intend, but I actually kind of interpreted it in a way as being a lot like Clive Barker's Nightbreed to me, and it was like the secret world of the monsters and what they have and all of that stuff. But I'm digressing. It's not about me
No, it's
tonight.
all good. No,
Um,
it's all good. But yeah, that's I think it's, it's what's presented to you as opposed to
mm,
now when you can watch any system get played, you can look up systems that are of interest to you, and everybody and their dog can make a one pager and put it up on itch,
yes,
right?
yes.
There's lots more, what we might call the long tail
Hmm.
of of media has now blossomed in this millennium.
What prompted you? Because this is kind of like a question that it's something that I've sort of faced because at my own school I've introduced like role-playing games and I've introduced them into my English classes, and depending on the level,
Sure.
we played in some of my high school Shakespeare classes. But
A
yeah, it was great. We played out like alternate versions of what would happen, and I had I had the young adults sort of set it up, and they would game master or they would be the bard like telling the story. Um, what prompted you to sort of start taking this seriously? And I'm not saying that with any sort of irony or whatever, because as a fellow teacher,
make it my job.
yeah, it's part of like what is it that prompted you to do that, and what was like the experience sort of like to sort of step into that area and start?
Yeah. In 2017, 2018, I exclusively been watching actual play and let's play and that sort of thing, and playing D&D since the start of fifth edition, but it wasn't part of my job, it wasn't part of my research. And I finished my first book and it came out in 2016. And the thing that you do after that is you're writing your way into the next project. And so my next project had been archival stuff that I'd been working on for years and years before that. And I'd been writing a lot of articles. So I was in article mode, not book mode, which means you can say yes to lots of different kinds of things, because you're writing a couple thousand words at a time.
Mm,
And there was a call for papers, in maybe late 2017, possibly early 2018, for an edited collection at McFarland. McFarland is the big academic publisher that is inexpensive enough to sell to everyone else
mm-hmm,
too, with a specialty in gaming, right? And so the book that Jennifer Grueling and 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 I am blank. Oh, Stephanie Hedge were editing, was about kind of the digital media and tabletop and all of this sort of thing. And then, so I was like, I've got some time. I'm in between, I've sent everything else out the door. I'm waiting for stuff to come back. No one's really looked at the narratology of the actual play Critical Role, which at that point had just finished its first campaign. And I was really fascinated as an 18th centuryist. I
mm,
read really long things so that other people don't have to. I already understand how long things work. And I'm a narratologist, which means I'm a person who is really interested in how things are made and how they're built, kind of it piece by piece in terms of the structure of narrative. And so I really wanted to explore that. And so I wrote this article called Is It Thursday Yet?, which appeared in that volume. And not long after it got published, I was talking to one of my colleagues, Craig Bertolet, and his wife, Anya Berlet, in my department, runs Reacting to the Past games in her classes. So she's writing a Shakespeare game,
oh,
among other
cool.
things. Yeah. So Reacting to the Past, for folks who don't know, is a you can do it's basically a kind of entire scenario in a bucket of a real historical moment, all of the people who were there, and primary sources for students.
Mm,
So the student gets assigned to be one part of, a turning point in the French Revolution, or a debate over Title IX, or what, or you're part of the Kingsmen,
Mm.
figuring out what the season is going to be, with this new guy, William Shakespeare, these kinds of things. And so um, we had students who were already familiar with gamification in the humanities classroom. And so Craig's and I were on Zoom, because by then we're in the early
Mm-hmm.
stages of the pandemic, thinking about what I'm going to teach coming up. And he says, we have this course number called Technology, Literacy, and Culture. Why don't you run it as a game class, and we'll see what happens. And I was like, all I have in terms of credential is I wrote this one article,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
who am I? But when you've got a comparatively small department, it's kind of, if it's you or nobody,
Yeah.
um then you go, okay, let's try. And so I know my lane, and so I had it, that first class was games as narrative, and said, okay, I know the narratology of games because I just wrote this piece, and we'll look at games, we'll look at actual play, we'll look at we'll look at computer games with Twine, we'll look at role-playing games, and we'll do this kind of 360 view. And the class filled in an hour.
Yeah.
And we have a month of enrollment. So the students who have the most credits, well, athletes and other students who have really constrained schedules, they go first, and then it's you know in 3-hour chunks,
Yeah.
whoever has the most course hours all the way down. So we didn't get to the juniors.
Right.
It was
Oh.
an all for all intents and purposes. So the rising seniors, functionally speaking, were the ones who got into that class. And that was when I started. I was like, okay, so we're now in the middle of pandemic. We're going to be in person. But I don't want them to come to class sick. And so how I need to figure out, in an active learning classroom, how do I ensure, like, I can't record lectures, and recording class seems boring. That's weird. So what am I going to do? And so I decided to record, teach class, come home, come to this room and record,
Mm-hmm.
5, 10, 15, sometimes 20 minutes of, this is what we did in class today. And that's where, I mean, we'd had a channel for a while, mostly to just kind of keep in one place the different presentations we were doing, like virtual Jane Con. And but this became a repository for, this is what class was designed to do, this is how we did it, this is what discussion went. And I started to realize that high school and college teachers were watching
Yeah.
the videos to get ideas for their own teaching. And so I don't know if my students ever watched it, to be quite honest. We had really good attendance a lot of the time, so we didn't need it in that way. But it became a really interesting place to say, okay, so this is how it's working and this is what it's for. And if something needed to be reinforced, it was there for the students to kind of take a look at.
Well, it was really interesting to see because actually I saw that format with a few of my peers when we
Mhm.
switched to online.
Mhm.
And what they would often do is they would take advantage of all of the tech that they had around them, and they were actually producing. Essentially, they were producing content for classes, and you could
Right,
go to my peers' channels, and if you missed the lecture for that day, or you missed the demonstration of that particular skill
right.
or whatever it is, they could go and click on it and click through and get all that information. What's interesting, I thought, about your channel is that you've got essentially it's like a diary. It's like a
It's very a
of
vlog.
what.
It's very vlog. It's very video blog.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind
I
of.
I
Yeah.
mean, I thought it was good. I mean, I think it's a wonderful tool for connecting you and the class and also like just people out there in general who are interested in hearing what someone is kind of up to in
Yeah.
their class.
And I think far more in terms of reach is the fact that, each class day I'm also tweeting a kind of mini thread of, this is what we're doing today, this is what we're watching or reading, This is why we're doing it. And it's also a kind of, for me, it's a citational ethics.
Yeah.
In this field in particular, it's really important for people to know that they're being read. And that's both the fact that in terms of game studies, most people who are doing game studies, especially actual play, especially tabletop role playing game studies, are junior, are graduate students, are new PhDs, are people who do not yet have, the security of the kind of job that I have, those sorts of things. So it's important for them to be able to say, oh, somebody's assigning my work in class. And on the actual play side, the actual players, this is also, a space where it's useful to be cited and known and seen. And I didn't realize that part until my DMs exploded.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I remember the moment when Abria Iyengar, who was having kind of literally the year they were calling the summer of Abria and then the year of Abria, where she basically got the actual play equivalent of the EGOT, right?
Mm-hmm.
She was guest DMing for Dimension 20 and then Critical Role and then the Adventure Zone and on and on and on, right? And now she's on New York by Night and a whole bunch of other things. And she found out that we were teaching Misfits and Magic because I was very interested in thinking about like the school form
Mm-hmm.
in actual play, and that was kind of one of the ways that I was hooking students, and it was pretty compact. And so she was like, "Is it weird if I come to your class?" And I'm like, "No, it'll be amazing." And then somebody said, "B. Dave Walters comes to
Yeah.
my class," and B.
Yeah.
Dave was like, "I'll come to your class." I mean, that man, if he's got a spot in his schedule, he will come and talk to your students, which is amazing. He's enormously generous, considering how many irons he has in the fire.
Mm.
And then it was my fellow educators, and it was designer Tim Hutchings, and it was my friend Nick Tiffany Lee, who's a critic of board games, and on and on. And so much so that Amy Carrero,
Mm-hmm.
who was a guest on Critical Role, she was part of Critical Role Exandria Unlimited, for folks who don't know. She is also the voice of She-Ra, Princess of Power, and she also had a whole bunch of filming dates. But she was like, I really want to come and talk to your students. We managed to make it work on Christmas Eve,
Oh, wow.
weeks after
Yeah.
the class was over. We all came back together. I was in DC. I was propping up my phone to be the camera with Legos.
That's funny.
I mean, it was ridiculous, but it was amazing, and it was such a wonderful and generous and generative kind of space. And that was when I realized, all these people I didn't ask.
Yeah.
They volunteered, which was really really lovely. And we have the rooms that I teach in, because I teach in a active learning classroom building, they are wired for sound and video. And so we're able to do this. The camera work for what the person who's coming in sees is a little weird. It's like this panopticon video, but it's fine. And then sometimes we were at home on Zoom. So it was really, really amazing. And from there, it just has grown and grown and grown. And now, um, my tweeting has caught the
Yes.
attention of the tabletop editor of Polygon. And so now I think of another part of my job, and another part of my kind of educational communication is the stuff that I write for Polygon, and kind of contextualizing and giving a little bit of a better peek into actual play and how it connects to other literature and other arts and ideas that people may not think about
Can
in other kinds of ways.
can you tell me, and I'm going to try and remember that because I want to come back to that in just actually a
Sure.
moment, but can you tell me what we could expect, like when someone comes into your classroom, um,
Hmm.
what are they going to see, or what sort of like activities will be going on?
Hmm.
What kind of like group discussions will be going on?
Sure.
What could I maybe see on maybe the best day that I can come into
Oh
the
man.
class?
Well, so I will say I had a teaching observation this past week. And I was told by my observer that it was a good day, so I'll say that. So the active learning classroom building, which I was one of the pilot faculty when we were figuring out what shape tables we wanted to have. So it's a flexible space. We have kind of tables that can move around. We do not have traditional kind of chair desks. And so I roll in to kind of configure for whatever the task is. So this past week, we were having discussions. So it was kind of a U shape to the best of our ability with the tables that we've got. And I'm in the middle in a chair, kind of spinning around, but staying at the student's level. We were talking about Kolak, which is an actual play by Hyper RPG that's extremely technically and visually ambitious. So we had that behind us. We'd annotated that video in Perusal
Mm.
together. You could also do this in Hypothesis.
Can you
And
tell
so
the
I,
Can you tell
yeah,
everybody
go
what
ahead.
Perusal is?
Yeah. So perusal and hypothesis are what are called social annotation platforms. So the idea is a student clicks a link either in the learning management software or somewhere else, and they're taken to the file, and sometimes it's a text. In this case, it's a video, and they can watch it. And as they watch it, they can insert comments and questions. And when they frame it in the form of a question, it gets sent directly to me. I look at all the comments in a class this size. In a 100-person class, I look at the things that are phrased in the form of a question to kind of speed it up
Yeah.
because I'm going to have hundreds of comments. And then I can check ones that are particularly good
Mm-hmm.
to give immediate positive feedback. I can reply to students and tag them in. And I can star things that are worthy of our kind of further discussion in class. And so we go around the room, kind of doing first impressions and kind of literally go around the room and with kind of first ideas, and then we'll kind of go in further. And it's a combination of, questions of fact, which are ones that are asking me for my expertise, and questions of interpretation, which I throw out to everyone else. And
Mm.
so it's a very, I don't want to say it's a Socratic, because I don't think that I'm particularly interested in asking a series of questions for a specific kind of answer, but it is a space in which we are dealing with things that are so new that that we are, generating. This is officially an undergraduate research course. So one of the things we're doing together is learning new things, and also learning what questions we want to ask,
Mm.
to people in the space of the kind of corpus we're building of texts, and the like. My students will probably say the best day is tomorrow, when we will have little pods of 4 to 5 seats, and we're going to play Alice is Missing, which is a role-playing game that takes exactly 90 minutes on the timer, but you have to do a little bit of prep, and debrief after. So I have two 75-minute classes that are set aside to play it, and then we'll have a 75-minute class to discuss it the week after. And it's entirely silent. You
Yeah,
play it with tech.
is it a text game, right?
Yeah, you either play it
Just
on your phone or some other device capable of doing text.
yeah,
Um,
one of the things that I find interesting is that so I'm trying to reconcile all of this as like as a teacher. I
mhm.
often feel like, and I again, your mileage may vary, but I often feel like I never have enough time to touch upon all of the things I want to touch upon. And the issue I often have with, say, helping someone improve their game or taking a look at an actual play or taking a look at a game itself is that it's very time consuming. You have to actually watch that, even if you're not watching every episode of Critical Role. If you're going to watch something, you're to me anyway, you're talking like a minimum of at least like a couple hours or maybe an hour of watching some sort of content and then reflecting on it. And of course, what's great is that you're using software that's, for those of you kind of listening along, it's basically kind of like the notes and things like that that you see like in Google Docs, except it happens with video, audio, and all of that stuff. Um, do you ever find like you don't have quite enough time to talk about all the things you want to talk about? Do you ever feel like, I could, if I only had a class that was 7 years long, it met, once a day for 5 hours, and there was a lab on Saturdays, I would feel like I could really get in deep? Or do you,
Oh, for sure. I mean, the reality is there's a reason why I come to this and I'm well prepared. I'm an 18th centuryist, right? My job is already, even before all of this, to take things that take an enormous amount of time to consume and figure out what are the representative cases
Mm,
that I can give to students in the space of 15 weeks that give them a hunger and an excitement to go explore more. And that's kind of what it has to be,
mm,
right? Is I um there are 18th century novels that I teach only when it's a graduate course and it's the only novel we teach the entire semester, right? Which is, there's a time and a place for that kind of immersive experience of a text. Um, I think what's helpful about actual play, and this is actually also true of the 18th century novel, as it turns out, is these are experiences that were not designed to be necessarily done alone and completely um without distraction,
mhm,
right? So actual play producers will talk about the ways in which versions of the show are used, while people are doing laundry or they're
mhm,
cooking, or, there's a reason why fan art flourishes in actual play because artists are drawing the whole time, right? They might be working on client work, but they're also probably gonna, do a little doodle of whatever they're watching. And that may lead to more commissions along the way. I mean, it's a kind of reciprocity in the system. And people think of the 18th century novel as precious in some way because it is old. But the reality is that most people who read the 18th century and into the 19th century, the novels that we think of as canonical and important, they were listening to them while they were knitting, while they were playing, checkers, or, mending something, or taking care of children. That these were experiences that took place by ear as much as anything else. And so I often tell my students, it's okay to listen to an audiobook. The text is also something you should make reference to, but sometimes the audio is more vibrant for
mm,
you. And that I do not believe in differences in learning styles. I don't, I that is that there we don't have any really effective data on that. But I do think that there are different modalities for different kinds of use cases and different kinds of, ways of learning that we want to get across. And this is another thing that really has been shaped by the pandemic for me, which is there's a podcast called Phoebe Reads a Mystery, which was like serialized little audio 15-minute chunklets of mostly mystery novels, but it kind of branched out beyond that. And I was listening to Wilkie Collins in a way I have read The Moonstone any number of times. I've
mm,
taught The Moonstone, but I did not appreciate it in the same way until I heard it by ear in this kind of way. And so it hammered home to me the idea that reading by eye and reading by ear are different, but that doesn't mean that one is subservient to the other.
mm.
It's also super ableist to say that one is superior to the other. And of course, me tweeting about that led to it being retweeted by Neil Gaiman, and all of a sudden
Oh,
I had friends on
zing.
Facebook saying,
Yeah.
"Hey, I just saw a tweet of yours." And I'm like, "You're not on Twitter." They're like, "Yeah, I'm in this group for people named Emily, or I'm in this group for readers, or I'm in this group for whatever." And it was one of those, "Oh, this is what virality is." And oh, thank God it was something I believe in,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to like some half-baked nonsense. I try not to tweet half-baked nonsense. So,
It,
that like helps.
I can't
But
tell you how many half-baked nonsense tweets I've had to delete in my life. I think I want to say first of all, I'm very impressed you're teaching Wilkie Collins. I'm like that's like super cool.
oh,
I
it's
didn't
been a,
know
it's
that.
been a minute. A long time ago, I taught a class on the epistolary mode, and
Mm,
so the Moonstone came out there.
of course, yeah. But let me ask this. It's so interesting that you talk about the unfair maligning that audio versions of stuff takes. It's so amazing. I can't tell you how many times I've had parents come up to me and they'll say, "Is it okay if my kid listens to the audio version of such?" And I'm like, "Yes." Like I think what's really interesting to me is I feel that audio versions of stories and narratives is a very neglected sort of aspect of our learning process, of our brains, and of skills that we have. So for me, like a lot of times when I'm teaching like about the most basic thing I could ever teach like a kid if I'm saying you're going to write an essay is you've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's very easy when you have like a physical page to show the child here's a beginning, middle,
Right.
and end. Then you have a high school student and you start doing like outlines and then you get like even deeper into that. So visually, I feel like we get so much visually. And the visual like aspects of learning get like played upon all the time. But the idea of someone who's able to close their eyes, listen to a lecture, and as they're lecturing, like Little Man Tate or something, being able to form the lecture in their head and predict like the ups and downs of the lecture, predict when they've just sort of entered a smaller,
Sure.
like a more detailed version. There's so it gets a it's so underrated and so underappreciated, and I feel like if I kind of could only do one thing for my kids in a way, I would probably just read them stuff. I would have them all sit around me like on some like couch somewhere, and I would just read them a story for an hour and a half, or I'd read them about mathematics and help them sort of form that structure. It's really good to hear. I'm sorry, I'm going off again, but like it's really good to hear someone that really believes in that and
Yeah.
appreciates
I
it.
mean, I think it's tricky, right? Like we're never going to have the kind of recall that a completely oral society does. We're just not. You know, that's not in our capacity. And it's I the kinds of experiments one would do
Mm,
to facilitate that. I think we're done in the 18th century and ended in people getting, stabbed or children running away or worse. Um, so but it is interesting to think about the ways in which, you know, we are we are a people of we are peoples of the book, and we are text-based people, and we may not always be, which is an interesting thing to think about. I don't think we're yet, past past textuality. And I think it is valuable, but I think that, yeah, I mean, for a lot of our history, most people experience things through their ears,
mm,
not through their eyes. And it was a privilege to be able to see things, to read by eye. And no one was reading silently until very, very recently in human history. It was seen as weird for a
mm,
lot of human history to read silently by yourself.
right.
And so, these are the kinds of historical groundings that as a book historian, is really important for me to communicate to students. Not to say, oh, do whatever, but to say, like, you're making choices, and you're making choices that are historically inflected. You're making choices that are about, what does the oral facilitate over the textual, and vice versa, right? There are lots of things you can't do,
Mm,
with an oral text, or your oral memory of a text, that you can do with especially with the codex,
mm,
right? We spend so much time reading by scroll, an ancient form of reading. But the codex exists because you can flip through it
mm,
really easily, as opposed to having to go right. Indexes are a beautiful thing. It's annoying
right.
when they don't exist.
Right.
um and so, yeah, a lot of my job is talking about those kinds of things. It just so happens that a lot of the time I'm now talking about, what are the affordances of a visual actual play versus a podcast actual play, those sorts of things.
That is interesting to me too, because it's something I've sort of recently discovered, and it's something that happened. It came about as a result, of course, of the pandemic, like so many things these days. So when I first started not getting back into it, but like finally hooking up again with my group of role-playing friends, we of course met through Zoom. And that sort of led, and there were lots of conventions that were canceled, and then kind of they bounced back a little bit and said we're going to do these online. And I think my first experience with an online convention was Gen Con online, and I was rather shocked. And now this is just something that seems like a duh kind of moment, but I guess because I'm just me and I'm very much in my bubble, I didn't see this. But I show up for Gen Con online and I have like 5 or 6 people that are in my gaming room, and 2 or 3 of them have their cameras off. And to me,
Mm,
I was just stunned, and I didn't say anything because I think the teacher in me is sort of trained not to sort of question people about their comfort zones and make
sure.
sure everybody's happy and all of that. But I sort of noticed that there was always a couple or 3 people in every like group out of like 6 or so that kept their cameras off. And it made me really think about a lot of things. It made me think a lot about how I perform because essentially I'm always performing. If this camera's on, I'm trying to do something to interest the other person visually and maybe my audience, which may be students, it may be you, it might be the people that are listening or watching now. The other thing it made me think about is the power of my voice and how I need to use my voice in order to sort of move around and tell a story or ask a question. And the other thing Zoom started making me think about was like the text chat. Like in
Mm.
class, if I ever had 2 or 3 students that were all yakking in the corner, I would go nuts. But what I noticed about the text chat was it was a wonderful tool for students to have sort of a side discussion about what I was talking about with another student and not disturb anyone. So it was interesting to see all the multiple different ways in which like students kind of um, connectivity with what was going on, or people's connectivity with what was going on, were engaged and interesting or useful and comfortable to them. And so now I'm kind of like, I feel like the Zoom and the internet and things like that have kind of like awakened or opened my eyes to things that were probably obvious or maybe should have been more obvious to me. Um, and I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm very sorry.
No, I mean, no, I think Zoom has taught us a lot of things, right? Um, and it has taught us about different ways of decentering ourselves. It has taught us about, surveillance, for better and for ill. And it has taught us about you know the ways we establish boundaries and the ways that we can build community virtually, right? And I think what's been very interesting has been the ways in which, once everyone was forced to spend at least some time
Mm,
living online and having to treat online as a legitimate and real place of engagement, a lot of the historical critiques of the virtual as not being the same went away very quickly. And it's not perfect,
mm.
but it is definitely um something that I think about a lot, especially as it has bounced back very, very quickly. Um uh and because we have kind of ricocheted back to this notion, especially in the convention and conference circuit, of thinking of in person as the only as the
Right.
only space. And I believe very strongly that there is something that happens in person. There are things that can be done in person that are much more difficult to accomplish virtually. Not impossible, but much more difficult, right? Um, in any number of ways. But what's disheartening is when all of the things that don't need to be done in person suddenly must be done in person again. And that's the strange thing. So as part of Gen Con, there's Generation Analog, which is like a collective of folks studying tabletop. It was originally intended to be kind of a pre-conference for Gen Con. And it's, sponsored by Asmodee and all that sort of deal. But of course, like, the first one that was planned was the Gen Con that went virtual. And so it has remained virtual this year. And it was amazing how community was built, through Discord and through, to a certain extent, through Twitter, and through the fact that it was small enough that, you could have actual Zooms as opposed to those creepy workshop Zooms, right?
Right.
Um, and 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 so it's been interesting to be in conversations, with people from that space, thinking about, when and why do we need to be in person, and for what goals, and what do we need to do, what do we need to do in person, that justifies, you know, that format. Um, and I'm having a lot of these kinds of conversations, especially now that, quite frankly, there's also, for those of us who are organizing in a lot of the United States, I can't in good conscience ask people to visit the state in which I live,
Mm.
either because, folks who are medically vulnerable or who have medically vulnerable people in their lives, but also literally anyone with a functioning uterus.
Yeah.
And that's true for a lot of the United States at this point. And California, for those who don't know, state employees of California have travel restrictions on which states they can and cannot go to for work, including things like academic conferences.
Oh,
And
that I
so,
did not know.
yeah. So if
Interesting.
you are an yeah, so if you're an academic in California, there is a rapidly increasing number of states where
Mm.
you can go, but you won't be allowed to use your travel money. You won't be reimbursed, and quite frankly, you won't be officially authorized to go. And that's going to start to become part of the conversation as well. And it's interesting to think about this in terms of, for example, Gen Con has explicitly said our contract is coming up soon, and we're not sure we're going to renew if the state continues in the pathway that it's continuing. And Gen Con is the largest conference that Indianapolis hosts.
Right.
So Gen Con has the ability, and has historically had the ability, to leverage that weight to impact policy. It will be interesting to see if that happens. It'll be interesting to see if it has to happen.
Yeah.
But these are, you know, not only we now so much talk about, what the virtual can't do, but the virtual can
Mm.
bring together people when it's not safe,
Mm.
either for folks to travel or to be in a particular place,
Yeah, it's
which
interesting.
is something I think about a lot.
It's interesting because I found that I had to defend virtual more these days. I feel like as an educator, my default response that is expected of me is to say, "Oh, virtual doesn't work, never going to work, can't do anything with it, doesn't work, it's impossible." And I feel like that's a little bit it's pretty unfair to virtual. I think that it was a very experimental time. I think there's a lot of stuff that, of course, that would be preferable to do in person, but I also feel like it was effective in other ways. And I feel like it's being kind of like given a bad deal, and I think it just deserves more investigation, more research and more like testing and more practice with it. I mean, I can't speak for other teachers, but I know that, I mean, everything I learned about streaming, I I learned from teaching virtually on in Zoom for 6 months, like
No,
eight
this is
hours
the
a
reason why
day.
all yeah, this is the reason why all of us can do these kinds of things, in it takes different kinds of shapes, is for our main job, we've had to upgrade. I am coming to you from a higher speed Ethernet than I bothered with before the pandemic. I have a better mic. I've upgraded my mic twice. Hopefully it's worth it. And my camera is probably going to be the next thing to come. This was a largely unused room until the pandemic, in many ways. It was the storage for the games. Um, and it's interesting because this is also a conversation that happens in actual play, as there is a widening gulf between the studio-based shows, most of which are based in LA, and the remote shows that record using the affordances of Zoom and Discord. And I will quote B. Dave Walters here because he has said it really pithily. Remote gets you the best possible options of cast. Studio gets you the best performance. And I think that still remains true. But it's really challenging to meet all of the necessary safety requirements for studio, on top of the fact that studio is just inherently expensive. And so, for a phenomenon, and this is mostly video based, podcast is a totally different kettle of fish, but we saw this huge boom first right after Critical Role got big in 20 in it starts in 2015, and you see kind of a slow growth until 2018, when the Kickstarter raises almost $12 million, and suddenly there's even it's explosive number of actual plays grow. And then the next big bump is in 2020,
Mm.
when everyone is forced to home, everyone's playing online. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people who have said, yeah, I got into like streaming because I was playing on Zoom anyway with my friends. So we figured we might as well record it. And if a few people wanted to watch it, that would be cool. And which is a very different kind of attitude than we're putting on a show. We're
Right.
trying to do other kinds of things with our um uh um with
With
what
our
we're
production.
what we're creating. Yeah.
So that kind of circles us around to something that you had mentioned earlier, and something I kind of want to ask about as well. And that's like, what is the difference, and what do you think people are trying to do when, tell me what I'm thinking when I want to stream my games, and what other people are thinking, say, when they put on a production. Like, what are the reasons? Why do I feel the need to stream my game? Like, I'm not in this for the money. I'm not in this for the
Right.
glory. Even though, of course, all those things are just falling on top of me right now.
Sure.
I'm not in it for that. I'm in it for other reasons. What are some of the reasons why people are streaming their games?
Yeah, I mean, so if I had the definitive answer to that, my survey would be done. But no, but this is actually the honors research seminar that I'm working with. What we are doing is collecting information. And one of the things we're collecting information on is, what do actual plays like look and sound like? What kinds of elements are they including, in terms of advertisements and art, and all these kinds, and how long is the DM talking before the players start
Mm,
talking, all these kinds of things. And we're doing that by looking at hundreds of actual plays, but the first 20 minutes, because and then skimming through the rest of it, looking for like the mid-roll and the and the credits and that kind of thing. But kind of not a question about narrative, but a question about form, because that's what we can do at
mm,
scale. The other thing that we're doing is we're formulating a survey, that the first question is, how do you participate in tabletop role playing? And if you answer you watch actual play, a set of questions will come up, or listen. If you produce or create actual play content, another set of questions will come up. And if you say and if you don't say that you watch actual play, a set of questions will come up to ask why not, right? And so we're trying to figure out what are the good questions to get to better answers. What I can tell you anecdotally is that there are people who get into this because it's their home game, and you might as well. Um, Most of the people that I'm talking to are doing this intentionally as a production at some, whether for money or not. And what and many of these folks are in their day jobs are not, you know, some of them are, my day job is a college professor, but some of them are, my day job is I work in television, film,
mm.
and theater, right? Especially I'm 90 minutes down the road from Atlanta. Atlanta has a big, not a big, but a thriving
Yeah, CNN's there,
um
right?
yeah, well, it's a big movie town, and it's a big TV town. And so there's studio space. And so there's a lot of television and film professionals and theater professionals who are based in the area. And so they have created a small actual play studio system. And they're not making huge money. They're in it because this is a creative thing that they can do. I mean, they would like to be paid more. They would like to have better sponsorships. They are seeking those things. But it's about the creative freedom of storytelling in this particular mode in a way that's not connected to the demands of the traditional media ecosystem. And I think that's the story that all the way up to Critical Role, that's the story, right? Critical Role's, the story that it tells is compelling and interesting. The story it tells about itself is as compelling, right? It's 8 friends who are actor owners of their own company, right? Today is the 4th anniversary of Dropout kind of being rescued from the corporate overlords to figure out a new way to be financially solvent. And so, and that was, in blood and fire. Geek and Sundry didn't make it out of the fire in
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah.
And so if you look at any of these success stories, you see this as part of the narrative is creative freedom to make what we want. And some of that is actual play and some of it is other things. This is the Headgum podcast system. This is the McElroy's podcast media empire. Um, Very rarely do you see I am a corporate giant who
Right.
wants to extend the saleability of my game. Although you have those kinds of relationships, Chaosium, is a big sponsor of shows. A fair number of indies that go on Kickstarter will commission a set of actual plays to show off their system. These sorts of things. Uh, but and of course World of Darkness has its own in-house
Right.
um by night series that they front the cash on. But that's creative freedom is often the rationale, and that sometimes that creative freedom is my day job is does not allow this for me, and so it's kind of the community theater sort of.
Right.
Some of it is the regional theater mindset
Yeah.
of I want to make a living, but it doesn't have to be a blockbuster
Right.
kind of situation. And some people have big ambitions, right? And it's an interesting paradox of I've talked to some of the people who are kind of the big movers behind the studio shows that everybody, say on Twitter, says they want to be on.
Mm.
And it's like they don't aren't looking for, and in some cases are actively not gonna hire someone who says they're a professional TTRPG player. They're looking for professionals who this is one part of their bigger portfolio, right? There's a reason why in LA it's voice actors and people who are connected to Upright Citizens Brigade,
Mm.
right? It's not, I mean, and those are all nerdy ass humans,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, but the idea that there's like a farm team system and then there's the big leagues is the biggest lie that nobody ever intended to tell about the world of actual play. That's not actually how it works for the vast majority of the way that casting is working these days. You don't you're there's not a pathway, there's not a ladder.
So inversely then, so that's, boy, I could like just go deep on all of that stuff, but we only
No, for
have
realsies.
we have a very short period of time tonight. But I was wondering then if that's wonderful. Can you flip the coin over now? Who's watching or listening to actual plays? Because this to me
That
is I
Yeah, I mean, well, the first thing I can tell you is a lot of people who make actual plays are not in that audience. It's quite honestly one of the reasons I suspect that I am followed by at least some percentage of the people that follow me on Twitter is because I live tweet shows that people feel an obligation to keep up with, but don't actually keep up with, in one shape or form. Um, there are several people who study actual play who have crafted their research so they don't have to watch actual play.
mm,
And yet we still have tens, hundreds of thousands of people who are watching actual play. Um, and so it's we don't have demographic information as far as I know. Nobody does. I mean, Zach Eubank might for Hyper because he's that kind of data nerd, but and there might be hidden. Twitch information. We just kind of know sheer numbers. And people who have Patreons will know, kind of can ask their Patreons, who are you and what's your deal? Or can find it out through Discord and things like that. So we don't have any kind of firm data about the average age, about, the gender breakdown, about any of those kinds of things, right? And there's a lot of assumptions. There's an assumption that it skews young because young people have more free time. And I don't think that's entirely wrong, except when you think about the fact that like something like Acquisitions Incorporated has existed for over a decade. And
Mm,
has a devoted fan base that still shows up for PAX and for live performances and things like that. So in it, to say young people watch actual play is like saying young people watch or young people play tabletop role playing games. It's belied by the fact that there's other human beings in the world
yes.
who have leisure time. I mean, arguably, I have more leisure time in my 40s than I did in my 20s as a graduate student. So, um, it's one of the things that we're thinking about asking in the survey. One of the challenges about that is because it's going to be geared to for IRB, Institutional Research Board, ethics reasons, we can't take survey results from someone who's under the age of 19.
Uh,
If the minute we ask age, we have to throw out all the results from anyone who discloses that they're under the age of 19. um which interestingly doesn't apply to the student researchers. We have student researchers under the age of
mm.
19. That's fine. They just can't take this survey.
Right. Just don't ask them any
um
questions.
right. So it's interesting. It's there's a limit on what we can even know. I mean, because it's entirely possible that there is a substantial underage, kind of fan base. And I suspect that that is the case, just judging from things like, activity I see on
Yeah.
discords or rules I see on particular discords about age
Yeah.
and whatnot, as well as activity on Tumblr and that sort of thing. But it's really hard to know. Certainly there are, so for example, Not Another D&D podcast, NADPod, is coming to Atlanta, and the center stage tickets for that show are $135. That's not kid money,
Right. Right.
right? So there's clearly some part of their demographic that is, I would imagine, their age. Which is to say, one of the shorthands I say to my students and to other folks about what fascinates me about actual play is that it is that the vanguard, the most visible people in the space are my age, and the most visible people who are watching it are my students' age,
Mm,
right? Which is rarely true in media. That there's that kind of um age divide and this kind of sense of engagement, especially given that actual play is indissolubly linked with the parasocial.
yeah,
um
it's interesting because if you think about, say, Hollywood or whatever, when you look at actors and actresses, it's the ages are going to skew lower. Then the people in production, however, are going to be like behind the scenes are typically going to be, for the most part, I would say higher. And then the audience, of course, well, I don't know. I mean, it would be tough to say because, probably the number one consumer of media, like a film, like at least from my generation or whatever, was probably like teens and 20s people. But I
well,
don't.
we know what the target demographic is,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's young men ages 18 to 34.
Right.
And so anybody who's outside of that is not the desirable demographic for mainstream media. And we are talking about a form that is inherently not mainstream media, which means that it can skew female, it can skew young, it can skew older, it can skew queer in different kinds of combinations, right? It's just not being fixated on that prime demographic.
Right. What would you say then? What is it that actual plays are doing differently? And I mean it in like a serious way. I know there's some obvious stuff, but I mean, what are they doing differently than other forms of media? Like, why would someone watch an actual play over going to watch a film? or
Hmm.
a series of episodes of Sandman on
Hmm.
Netflix, or read a
Sure.
comic, or
Right.
um, what what is it that they're doing differently that's
Yeah.
attracting people?
So there's a couple of things. One is, well, and also I should say actual play varies wildly, right? You've got everything from Critical Role, which very intentionally does something that almost no one else can do now, which is run a live to tape show once a week. Most weeks of the month they take a break now so that people can catch up for 4 hours or more, right? And have tens of thousands of people watch it. Um, Unedited in a layout where you can see every actor for all of those 4 hours. It is exhausting for the performers, and it is challenging for the eye because the eye doesn't have a clear place to go. But for people that love that show, and I include myself in this, that's the point. The point is you could, in theory, even rewatch, or more likely, you can see someone else clip different reactions and get a kind of interesting new kind of experience out of this. Depending on whose reactions you're watching at any given time,
Mm,
you are getting that what so Jennifer Grueling, when she was talking about tabletop narrative structure, and this was before actual play, it was there's the narrative level of the dice, there's the narrative level of the dungeon master talking about what's happening, there's the narrative level of you talking in character, and there's the narrative level of you planning, and there's the narrative level of you saying, hey, could someone get me a beer?
mm,
And what Grueling argued at the time was the hey, could you get me a beer is irrelevant to the story being told on the other narrative levels. In actual play, especially in studio actual play that's uncut like Critical Role is, sometimes meaningful things happen at the beer level. Um, for example, Matt Colville, in a video that is now taken down from the internet, does a close reading of the climax of Critical Role. It's not behind the screen. It's not behind the curtain because there is no curtain,
yeah.
right? So there's that. There's that. Um, but there's a lot of editing. There's a lot of, and in fact, I agree with Carlos Luna and Abria Iyengar and a bunch of other people who have said tighter shows edited are the way forward. Um, and so you're going to lose that everybody on screen kind of feel. What you still get in actual play, even in an edited format, is the element of chance that comes with role playing.
Mm,
And what that means is while you've got a table full of people who have seen the Marvel movies and have, watched Sandman, many of them have read Sandman, and you've got people who got the same kind of vocabulary of how stories are built, no matter how hard they try, the dice will thwart them. They can't fall into cliche no matter how hard you try, because there's the element of chance that takes any story structure you try to impose on it and plays merry hell with it. And in a time when everything is regimented so much that you can pretty much predict in most television shows what's going to happen next, even when it's reactionary and doing the thing that other TV shows don't do, except for other TV shows also
mm,
do that twist, right? Like you have to be Black Mirror, and even Black Mirror can be predicted in these kinds of ways. Um, the element of chance means that when you are watching an actual play, there is the very real possibility that things are not going to go as you expect. And in
mm,
fact, not going as you expect is the hallmark of the form.
mm. What, um, as you say that, however, I must admit, the game master in my head is saying all kinds of things, and this may say more about me than it does about what you're saying. The game mas the game master in me is also the one that's trying to shape the story a little bit, and
Sure,
I'm not necessarily trying to railroad it. What I'm trying to do is
sure.
build some sort of a satisfying emotional twists and turns.
Right.
so that it's not um, it's a little hard to describe um, because I think I'm just sort of articulating it right now.
Well,
Um,
I'm let me see if this might work for you. Um, so when Critical Role hired Brennan Lee Mulligan to do EXU Calamity, a game where everyone knew what was going to happen, disaster was going to happen. This was a tragedy. Um, People asked him Mulligan about the question of railroading, and he says, "When you know character desires, it's not railroading. It's putting particular kinds of things in front of your players that you know their characters will react to,
hmm.
and that's a structuring, not a railroad.
Yeah,
Does that work?
I think so because to me, I feel like a lot of people say that there's this game master strapped to the front of the train and laying down tracks and it's going to turn left or right. I sort of sometimes see it as like what it's really about is I have a bunch of players that are throwing a lot of clay at something and I see the clay in big lumps, and they're just throwing it. So they're trying to sort of make something happen, but I'm the one that's got to tuck that clay in a little bit here and over there and tidy it up a little bit to carry forth with their momentum. Like if I see them
Right,
clearly going for something, they're glowing, and in the simplest terms, they're going to kill that bad guy or they're going to grab that object and run away with it. My it sort of falls upon me as game master to sort of ensure that there's some sort of the narrative, the emotional roller coaster they're riding, while it may not be predictable like what the dice are going to tell us, I'm going to try and fit it into an emotional sort of
sure,
payoff for them in a way.
sure,
So um, I was just sort of wondering how much of the dice rolls are affected by, as random as they may be, could be
right.
affected by a very skilled uh, ad-libbing, someone who very skilled, like you were saying that they look for people from who are good at voiceovers and good at oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot it.
Well, no, that I mean those are the pools that they're drawing from, but when you ask them what they're casting for, they're
Hmm.
casting for people who are good audiences, right? That they are not hogging the spotlight because this is a collaborative art. And that's why, of course, it ends up being so many people from improv,
Right.
right? Because it's not only being quick on your feet, it's knowing when to give the energy and when to draw from the energy to fuel your own performance, right? And it's the creation of drive, right? Of character drive. Um, but I think that the the I would be very interested. I have not yet seen, and I feel very comfortable in saying I have not yet seen um an actual play that somehow conforms tidily to a 5-act structure where I
Yeah.
could see where it was headed. And that's what I mean by, there is the element of the unexpected. Formally, it's going to be unexpected. It's not going to behave quite the way. And even the moments when there is a kind of satisfying resolution that's drawing from other ways we have understood satisfying resolution, the path there has not been, the ways I'm thinking about Dimension 20 is about to end A Court of Fey and Flowers, which is near to my heart because it's a Jane Austen meets D&D game, right?
Yeah.
And what's most fascinating to me is the fact that this is a group that starts with a vague knowledge of the television show Bridgerton, varying levels of the knowledge of Austen, a little bit of Bronte for some reason has come up in discussion. Strong sense of fantasy genre and these sorts of things. A strong stable of improv, and what they produce out of this
Mm,
kind of, it's not monkeys writing Hamlet.
mm,
That does them a disservice. But what they end up illustrating far better than any other Regency adaptation I have seen, and I have seen many in my career, is the plot lines and the thematic concerns and the tropes and stuff that have been forgotten by modern mainstream media that were present in the real Regency novel, not in Jane Austen, but in other writers of the period. And that is delightful and fascinating to me. And they did not plan it because they don't know Bernie, they don't know Edgeworth, they don't know the weird 1790s super political weirdo homoerotic novels I know. It just so happens that, that's where their energy and the beautiful weird chemistry of these characters in this particular space has brought
Taking
us.
them, yeah.
And yeah, and I don't know how you get there in any other way other than an improvised story of this kind.
Right.
It's certainly not, Abria's intention. It's certainly not anybody at the table's intention, and yet what they've done is really given us a new way of thinking about those concerns in a space that is very not the 18th century.
Yeah.
Right? It is very clear. It is the Feywild, and that is why it functions. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think that even the most, cut for time or engineered or tight actual play still has enough of that investment in creative freedom and that interest in play, that interest in randomness, and a vocabulary that is unconstrained by we're operating in this particular genre, and so we can only have this kind of moment. And so until people feel like they have to break a story every single time and conform it to mainstream expectations, then it becomes bad TV,
Right.
to use a phrase from a colleague of mine. But that's not what's happening right now. What's happening right now is people are saying, this is a space where I can be free,
Yeah.
where I can tell a story. And it's inevitably going to be intertextual and it's inevitably going to play on tropes, but it's not going to follow the rules, so to speak. It's the rule of cool, narratively speaking, as well as anything else.
And I think that's maybe an advantage that an actual play might have that others don't have. So when you're making a film or writing a book, you have the chance to go back and rewrite and do things over and over and over again because you're going for a certain, you are hyper controlling like every word, every moment on the screen that anyone sees. And I think, and this is kind of like a thing that I've sort of thought about a lot. There are times when my game is derailed because my players love talking to this NPC. And so for half an hour, we'll talk to an NPC and kind of engage in that, and they will be completely 100% entertained by that. And in any film, if I sat there and just for half an hour watched some, no matter how funny the character was, well, maybe if they were really funny, but I wouldn't want to watch that. But I think the difference is that the players are stepping into that and maybe you're kind of watching them in a way. If you're watching an actual play, you're watching the, and this is again maybe what you're talking about the various levels, but you're watching the players having fun talking to the NPC and like the little glances that maybe the players are giving each other, or the rolling their eyes, or like the GM getting frustrated with it, or whatever. And that,
Or rolling with it,
or
right? I
rolling,
mean,
yes, or rolling
I
with it.
mean, and that's my favorite. That's my favorite part of basically any actual play is inevitably there is the NPC that the
Mm,
DM never expected to be important or expected them to be important in a different kind of way. The one that gets cited a lot is in campaign 2 of Critical Role is Essek Thalis, who literally is in the book published by Wizards as a neutral evil and antagonist.
right.
That's how he's designed. The party decides to give him a big hug and transforms this character, right?
Yes.
And thus he becomes a fan favorite. He has uh I think it's at this point hundreds of not if not hundreds of hours, dozens of hours of presence in the game, and I only know this because there are supercuts of every time he appears.
Yeah.
And I think it's no wait, it's two, I think like 16-hour videos. It's a lot for an NPC, right? And so and there, Balnor in NADPOD, any number of other kinds of examples from different kinds of actual plays. We can imagine Garfield in the Adventure Zone, all these sorts of deals. And that's the it's not a game that involves audience interaction, because Dimension 20 can't have audience
Mm,
interaction. It's pre-recorded.
yeah.
Many studio shows are now pre-recorded, all these sorts of things. Um, there is still, through social media and through fan information labor, through fan work, like vids and clips and art and all these sorts of things, there are ways in which, this becomes a kind of reciprocal relation in different kinds of ways. The barriers are particularly low in most actual plays. I mean, even Critical Role, which has a pretty sturdy walled garden in terms of a social media policy of boundaries, nevertheless has, a robust relationship to
Mm.
its fan creators, in ways that have shaped canonical depictions of different elements.
Um, Dr. Friedman, you've been very kind with your time. We're going a little bit longer than I had told you we were going to go, but I
It
feel
is
like we're
all
getting
good.
such gold here. I wanted to continue to mine it
This
for
is the
all it's worth.
danger of the
Hit
actual play
subscribe,
person.
folks. Just hit subscribe. Well, I'll keep the stuff coming if you just hit subscribe. Tell your friends to
Yeah.
subscribe. Can I ask
When
you?
when you live tweet 4 hours, you no longer understand how time
You
works.
know what's really funny though is from doing actual plays that were 4 hours long, sometimes five. I can just zip through an hour and a half or a 2 hour interview, and I feel like, oh, I can do another interview right now if I want. Like I just feel
That's
like
true.
time has become relative for me, in that respect. As kind of a final
Hmm.
question here, um, do you foresee a day when people are looking at actual plays, uh, and I know my own answer to this, but I would love to hear a more scholarly view on this. Actual plays are looked at and appreciated as an art form, something to be sort of valued, something that gives back to, reflects us and says something about, is valuable to watch and to
Yeah.
participate in. And
Yeah. I mean, I think I think the answer is yes, and I think that it's already happening. Quite honestly, I think we're gonna see a generation of game designers and artists and creatives who come out of these fandoms, um, or who have been touched by these fandoms in these kinds of ways, um, and and produce, whether what they produce is actual play or something else. I think we're going to see the imprint of these works. I think there is actual play that is art. Kolak is art. Hyper RPGs trying to do and are making negative hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it is art. What I will also say, and this is the cautionary tale, and I think we're all very aware of this right now at this very particular moment, as the kind of big streaming companies, and
mm,
we mentioned at Paramount already this interview, so we're bringing it full circle at the end, are actively removing things from access. We have less access to our filmic history than we did when you and I were in college. We are in constant danger of loss. The Internet Archive could go away. And one of the things that I tell my students about actual play is it is so massive. And there is no mechanism that I know of to archive it in any way, shape, or form, either by selection or by studios keeping their own archival copies or anything like that. We are in danger of having this be something like theater in the 18th century,
mm,
but with less of an apparatus to remember it. And so, one of the things that I am trying to do in my scholarship, and one of the reasons why I have kind of put aside the archival work that I'm doing, is the paper archives aren't going away. I don't know where this digital material will be. I mean, we've already lost at least one very early actual play to Oblivion, and there's no guarantee we won't lose much more before we finish telling the history of this form. Um, everything when everything is dependent on Twitch and YouTube, we're in big trouble.
You're saying they're
Um,
not dependable? What do you mean?
I'm saying you depend on
Yeah,
any form digital form at your peril
yeah.
without a clear. I mean, the other hat that we did not talk about today is like the work I do with 18th Connect, which is part of kind of metadata preservation of access, and it's led to my training in how digital stuff is made sustainably available for the long term. I mean, one of the things that's useful is that I am writing for the near term. I've got a lot of
Mm,
deadlines coming up real fast. But I'm also thinking about this for the long term. What is the story that we want to tell future generations about what we were in, what this was happening? What phenomenon was happening? What was it like for the audience? What was it like for the makers,
mm,
right? These communities of practice, many in LA, but also in the Pacific Northwest and Atlanta and Chicago and Philly and a little bit in New York and all over the world, right? I pulled up one random afternoon on Twitch. We were in You could be in 12 different countries and 7 different languages
mm.
watching people play actual play. This is a huge
Yeah.
phenomenon, especially relative to the number of people who are paying attention to it. So I think that um, we're in danger of losing it, and it isn't until we successfully make the argument that it is art and that it has a cultural impact that that we even begin to ensure that it has as future resonance. And so that's why I'm teaching and writing and doing all this stuff and talking to as many people as I can.
Well, I appreciate you talking to me tonight. And I just want to say, as Dr. Freeman kind of hinted at, we were not able to talk about all of the things I wanted to talk to her about. And this, don't laugh, because this may mean I'm dragging you back on the show for like a part two or something to get at those other things.
Very cool.
She has she is as you can tell, she's a fount. She's a wellspring of research, of reflection, of inspiration and ideas and thoughtfulness on role playing, on gaming, and on so much more. So I've put 5 or 6 of her links in the comments, or I'm sorry, in the description below. I urge you to just close your eyes and click on one of them. You're going to find something interesting to follow. An interesting aspect of something she's looked at or researched or has an opinion or an idea on. So I do urge you to go check out Dr. Friedman's stuff. Um, for those of you that enjoyed this conversation tonight, please do think about liking and subscribing and sharing, actually sharing and spreading the good word about what I'm trying to do here is the best way to get this out. I think it's no secret. I'm not trying to make money off of this. I'm just doing this because I think that there are really interesting people in the role playing community out there to talk to. And I'm convinced that role playing is a form of art, is something really, really important, and it's something world changing. So please do think about liking, subscribing. Please share and spread the word. And then also check us out on our social platforms. So we've got Discord, Facebook, and Twitter. And just to let you know, upcoming, again, I have a few cool things. I have Rick Perry from Dimension
The
20
coolest
coming on.
thing.
Very, very
He's so
cool. Jonathan Hicks is coming on. And then I have a couple surprises. I think they're going to be really interesting at the end of October. Some really interesting guests. So, Dr. Friedman, one final time, thank you so much. I do appreciate you coming on. I don't have a copy of my home game for you to take home, but you do have my thanks, and I'll definitely be like DMing you for like maybe a second appearance where we can go over the other 400 questions I had for you. But
very
this has been
cool.
super wonderful to have you on. Um,
Awesome. It was a real pleasure.
it was great. It was great to have you. Stop on by anytime. Just knock on the old Zoom door. And for those of you out there, please make sure your next game is a great one, and please do stay safe. I'll see you on the next episode of Role Player with 1,000 Faces. Thank you so much, everyone.